Hello again. Welcome to Jono Talks F1. We have the Mexico Grand Prix race review, and Classic Max is back. But this time with the stewards not on his side. I'm of course talking about the antics that happened at the weekend, so let's get into it. Turn 1. Nowhere near as treacherous for the front four as I thought it would be, but yet again we have a while to wait before the safety car is released in an incident. Poor Yuki makes contact with Albon, which is ultimately nothing more than a racing incident. Just too many cars next to each other fighting for the same bit of tarmac. Something had to give, and sadly it was Tsunoda's wheel. He was sent careering into the barriers, and we get nearly half a lap down the road before the safety car is released. Like, it happened on the pit straight. You can see his literal wheel flying off, waving goodbye to the driver, and it takes an age for the safety car to be released. It's always baffled me this. I have no idea why it takes them so long to get a safety car out. We've seen time and time again so many incidents where cars are stranded in the middle of the track even, when Russell was on his roof. And it took them ages to get the safety car out. For me, that should have been a red flag straight away. But this is just a testament to the stewards that we have at the moment. I don't understand them. And I'm not sure I will understand them for a good while. Eventually though, the safety car was out, and it felt like it took an age for it to go back in on the other side of the coin, but it's just because of how small the track is in a way. That's one of them things. Was wincing though when the tractor was clearing Albon's car and they were making their way through. History has told us that it's never good when there's a tractor on track. The incident was neither Albon's or Yuki's fault though. I agree with the steward there, it was a racing incident. Like I said before, it was just too many cars fighting for the same bit of track. And it happened at the start of the race, especially when there's such a big lead up down to turn 1. Then, when the green flag finally hit, Sainz went on to remedy his poor start and reclaim first place. Poor start is not really fair to say, I think. He did get away quick, but the second phase of Verstappen's start was just so much better. He got the traction down better and got a better run up. And then he just put it down into turn 1 and managed to get it done. But Sainz going through began the onslaught of Max, people trying to get past, which brings us to, you guessed it, the incident, the one that later led to Leclerc being gifted second place, which I think he would have got anyway. I don't see Lando would have been keeping Leclerc behind him. It would have been an interesting fight, and I think we were robbed of seeing that fight. But let's get into it. Get yourselves a brew, it could be a while. Unlike the last race though, Norris was ahead into the corner all the way this time, and I think he remembered that from the last race, so I think he made sure of it this time. That's key to remember though, because that's the deciding factor. Like I said, last time out, apparently Norris wasn't ahead. All the way from corner entry to apex, Norris had his front wing in front of Max. Bravely, might I add. Obviously didn't learn from last time out. I would have not gone around the outside this time. Now, Max here, bless him, he's done what he always does. He released the brakes and yet again forces the car on the outside off the track, almost sending himself off the track too. So much so that he's almost up the inside of Sainz at this point, completely off the racing line, which allows Leclerc to catch up to him and have a front row ticket to watch all this unfold, which he will later be gifted second place, as we were saying before, thanks to the Mad Maxness. It's key to remember that at this point, although Norris was ahead this time, Max is simply just exploiting the rules because, as Martin Brundle said before, there's like 6 pages of rules that dissuade, I think he used the word dissuade, overtaking. So Max is just exploiting the rules at this point. He's running the car out wide and claiming it as his and saying that he would have had nowhere to go. But the rules allow this at this point. Here's where it gets interesting. Because if it wasn't for the next bit, he probably would have just got away with a measly 5-second penalty if one was coming his way. So, he's released the brakes to carry more speed into the corner, forced Lando off again, In doing so, ruined his line through the corner, and now he's ultimately slow through the chicane. Meanwhile, Lando reluctantly and temporarily tries his hand at rally driving and goes over the grass, being forced wide, possibly damaging his floor a little bit. He does well to come back on track and not impede Sainz though, but due to the rally incursion, he's lost traction at this point and Max catches back up. So he gets a slipstream on him and attempts something at the next corner. I don't know what it was, but it was definitely not an overtake attempt. He's barely even used the brakes at this point, throws it down the inside. Arguably late. If you watch the replays again, you can tell as soon as he's committed to the inside line, he's not chosen to take that corner at all. He's trying to force Lando wide yet again. So much so that when he does get to the apex of the corner, his car is now facing in the wrong direction compared to the racing line. I was going to try and use angles then, but I'm not even going to attempt to because that's just going to fail miserably on my part. But this is all part of the recipe that all adds up to him ultimately getting the biggest penalty we've seen in this sport for a while. And that's the 20-second penalty he gets. His rather optimistic and audacious lunge almost sends himself towards the wall, never mind Lando. It's moves like this, though, that will always be the reason why I personally say Max is not a worthy champion. Because we all know the McLaren is faster. Max at the moment has fourth fastest car at best, maybe the fifth fastest car at best, because later on in the race he couldn't even catch the Mercedes duo at all. At one point he was losing a second a lap. So what's the point? There's literally no reason for any of that madness, and knowing this, you would logically put up a fight and defend, yeah, because you're fighting for a championship, but ultimately, you'd know you're getting overtaken, it's inevitable. You let him pass and you maximise the points that you can get for that race to try and seal the championship in your favour. He ruined his own race. He also put his team in an embarrassing position. I'd hate to be his race engineer. Gianpiero is having to put up with him whining about his own errors. It's embarrassing. I would not have the patience to do it. It looked very much like as well when we watched that on the television cameras that the speed that he was taking into that chicane was way too much for the corner itself. And as soon as he forced himself wide because he had too much speed to actually take the corner properly, he, if you watched the onboard, came so close to that wall. Lando, thankfully, had his wits about him and knew to back out, because if he'd carried on, he could have lost traction and been into that wall straight away. I think black and white flag should have been shown to Max for that one. It's only a matter of time before those antics will not only cost someone to crash because he's doing things like this, if he carries on, but it could also mean serious injury to somebody. You got to remember, these guys know the track off the back of their hand. Back of their mind? Some sort of expression like that. But they memorise the tracks and they know exactly where to brake, exactly where to turn in, and where they can push it. So when Lando gets to that corner, he's turning in. He's not thinking Max is lunging down my inside, I'm going to go straight on so I'll avoid him. Not unless he sees him in the mirrors, which the mirrors are extremely small on these cars, don't forget. The vibrations that go through the car. Have you ever driven a big vehicle and you see the shake that the engine causes in the mirrors, or if you've ever had a loose mirror on your car and you see the glass shake, that's what it's like for them at the speeds they go. So as soon as he gets to that corner, he's turning in. And it's only a matter of time before that happens. Like in Italy with Lewis and Max. That's when it happened. And Max blamed Lewis, saying he didn't give him enough space, but he was the one overtaking around the outside from behind. But speaking about his team, did anyone see after the race when we also had Christian Horner do his best to save Max's reputation? So Max did his usual in the media pen, saying the stewards are crazy and that he's done nothing wrong, sticking to his story, while his boss is out there in a press conference with his little iPad doing his best to desperately save some face. If you didn't hear about this, he went into the press conference armed with an iPad and tried to convince people on why Lando should have been penalised and not Max, saying that Lando's corner speed, when he was trying to overtake Max, was way faster than Lando's corner speed when he was attempting a fast lap. Because if I remember rightly, Lando got the point for fastest lap, which they're scrapping next year. I don't understand that. That's craziness to me. What they should do is keep fastest lap attempts, but close the pit lane 5 laps till the end of the race to stop people pitting with a couple of laps to go, forcing people to, well, stay on track. If you close the pit lane 5 laps before the end of the race and still have the fastest lap rule, I guarantee it'll be more interesting. But back to little old Christian Horner and his iPad. The one thing he's forgetting about the scenario he's trying to tell people about is that Norris had a torpedo at the side of him pushing him off track. So yes, of course his corner speed is going to be faster. What Horner should be doing is taking Max aside and speaking to him, letting him know that majorly he needs to calm down, otherwise his reputation is at stake. And when you're a world champion, your reputation is everything. Damon Hill talks about this and makes a very good point, saying that he's not even sure if it's in Max's arsenal to drive appropriately when it comes to the hard pressured situations. And off the evidence we've seen, you have to agree. I mean, let's look at the evidence. Every time Max gets a bit aggravated, or every time something happens, or every time he's losing positions, it's always the car's fault. Every time it cuts to the team radio, it's always Max raging at someone in the team. Every time something happens, it's the car's fault. He's always shouting, he's always annoyed. Poor little Gianpiero Lambiase. I think I'm saying that name right, I might be butchering that. But poor little old him is always getting it down the ear, when really, it should be Max being accountable for his own actions. Yeah, the car's bad, but you don't have to push someone off wide the track. It's, I agree with Damon Hill in what he was saying. If you've not heard that, it's a very good podcast to listen to. I think it's available on the Sky F1 site. But he talks about those points exactly and how he doesn't think Max has it in his capabilities to drive appropriately and properly when it comes to those hard pressure situations. And when we've seen it in the past with Lewis Hamilton, we saw a lot of what we're seeing now in 2021. The difference was, though, it was never sorted. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said they need to nip it in the bud quick. And that was this year. Why was no one saying this in 2021? It's craziness. But Lewis has mentioned it in the media pen bit pre-race. Because in the driver's conference, apparently, the driver's briefing, Max and Lando were exchanging words between themselves in front of everyone in the driver's briefing. And I think that is one of the key points. So obviously the FIA sitting in those drivers' briefings. And I think that is probably an eye-opener to the FIA and why we've actually seen the 20-second penalty come around. There is people saying that it's corruptness, and they're saying this because... Okay, so stick with me now, because this could get a little complicated, because I'm not very good at explaining things sometimes. But the person who announced the penalty, and that's the key word there, announced the penalty, is the son of the founder of McLaren. And you've got Max Verstappen fans saying that this is the corruptness that led to him getting a 20-second penalty. And that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. If you know F1, you know that the F1 stewards are, I'd say, 10 to 15 people that make up a full room, and they have every camera angle available to them, and they have all the data available to them. So all the data that the teams get is available to the FIA immediately. Just because you don't see it on the television cameras doesn't mean it's not there. So they have all the angles, and they're the ones that will release the footage if they deem worthy. So sometimes the television cameras aren't allowed to show specific angles, because the FIA are using that footage to deliberate penalties. And like I say, let's just say it's 8 people altogether. The stewards' room is made up of a certain amount of people and they all give their opinion, and whether it's unanimous or not, it goes to a vote on if the penalties should be given, kind of. So Max getting the 10-second penalties would have been 7 out of 8 people saying yes, that's a penalty. Maybe even 8 out of 8 people. The fact that the guy who happened to announce the penalty was the son of the founder of McLaren had nothing to do with anything. What about all the other people in the room? Are you going to tell me they're the son of the founder of McLaren? It's okay to clutch at straws to why Max is behaving so tragically, but let's be realist while we do it. There's been enough corruption in the sport, we don't need to make up corruption. I think that is all I have to say about that as well. It really annoyed me when those people are saying that it's all corruption. I get that Max is a lot of people's favourite driver, but a lot of people were saying Lewis fans are butthurt after 2021 when the actual corruption happened. And the moment something happens to their hero, the coin is flipped around straight away. The rest of the race seems calmed down a bit after that. Norris eventually made a great charge and caught up to Leclerc. By the way, Charles pulling off a fantastic save to keep his prancing horse out of the barriers in the last corner. Towards the end of the race, I'm going to say about 10 laps to go. 5 laps maybe. This was the point where Norris was about 1 to 2 seconds behind, and he managed to close the gap in the last corner, and he was pushing and was in DRS range by this point. So Charles was on the throttle too early, lit up the rear tyres and got oversteer coming out of the last corner and managed to pull off a fantastic save to keep that Ferrari out of the walls. If he hadn't have made that save, Charles Leclerc would not have been finishing that race. That was a great save. It did give Lando second place. It was the mistake that gave Lando second place, but he was going to get it anyway. And the McLaren at this point in the race was faster. So, I mean, people are saying if he had more laps, he could have caught Sainz, but that's ifs and buts. It's pointless. There is no more laps. If the fight with Verstappen hadn't have been so, well, fighty, Leclerc wouldn't have been gifted second place anyway. And it would have been Norris and Leclerc fighting for second place down the line. So who knows if Lando would have won the race or not. I personally think that was probably the best result for Lando. It's a bit of a shame if you're a Lando fan that Max managed to make up all them places, which begs the other question of his teammate being stuck down in like 17th place, where Max was dead last after a 20-second penalty at one point. How was he able to climb through the ranks and yet his teammate's still down there struggling, trying to get past Liam Lawson? Makes no sense. The Mercedes duo, on the other hand, keeping their heads down, had a good little battle this weekend. Lewis's car was running more downforce, so down the straights Russell was much quicker as his car was running less downforce, but that meant that he suffered in the corners, where Lewis then caught him in the corners again. This later built up to pretty much a 10-lap showdown of Lewis chasing him down and eventually overtaking George. But you could definitely see Lewis had more downforce on the straights because he would be right up behind George in that last corner. But then as soon as you got to the straights where George is in the defence, the DRS was useless due to the drag that Lewis had on the rear wing so much, running that higher downforce. It's interesting that Mercedes put him on that setup. Not interested in any way such as they're trying to ruin his race or anything. It just, these are what your practice sessions for. But also, it probably was because Russell crashed. So a lot of the commentators were saying he's running Silverstone setup. I don't know if that meant he was running the rear wing from Silverstone or anything like that, because they didn't have any extra parts, but I think it also meant they didn't have the extra time to compare data. So the rear wing they had on Lewis's car was just that downforce, and it's not a case of they were doing it to ruin Lewis's race. I think it was more luck that Russell crashed and ended up with a lower downforce setup. But as you see in the corners, it then hurt him. And over the length of the lap and the race, it actually was slower because Lewis got past him. You could argue that it was maybe the better man one, but at this point, it was more bragging rights. Mercedes said you're now free to race because they're fixed on research for next year's car. So finishing position this year, basically point scoring on the other person. Which you could argue it's more important to Lewis, and he has the bigger reputation to lose than Russell. But I don't think they're that petty, especially Lewis. Lewis is not that petty. He sees the bigger picture. He knows he's not going to beat Mercedes. He knows it's probably better in the grand scheme of things for Russell to look like the better person, as he's going to be the senior to Kimi Antonelli next year. But it was great that Mercedes let them race instead of team orders, because Lewis was faster, and if team orders would have just come up and said let Lewis through, it would have been very boring. And we don't want that. We hate that. So more racing, the better. Speaking of more racing, the better, it was a shame for Alonso this weekend. He had that gorgeous helmet, and his Grand Prix was ultimately cut short because of debris, if I'm not mistaken, stuck in his near side brake duct, I think, if I'm not wrong there. That meant he had to retire the car and they couldn't continue. Verstappen's counterpart also struggled. Verstappen's counterpart also struggled this weekend. Perez feeling the pressure. 2 questionable overtakes from him. I don't know whether he was feeling the pressure because it's his home race, but one of those questionable overtakes earned him a middle finger from Lawson. Don't know if a lot of you saw that, but when Lawson eventually got past him on the straight, he gave him a nice middle finger. But I don't know whether it's just something that Christian Horner has been teaching his drivers, but Perez was forcing them wide left, right and centre as well. Earning himself damage from Tsunoda, I think it was at one point as well. But another one of those drivers he forced wide was Stroll, which a lot of people won't feel sympathy for, but still. Liam Lawson also found himself losing part of his front wing, which was a big shame for him. He didn't deserve that this weekend. He's had a great race, and it was a shame that it sort of, ended up in his front wing being damaged from the Williams overtaking him. We've seen a lot of incidents this weekend as well. We didn't see the safety car for ages, and then we saw an incident in almost every session leading up to the race, and then the safety car in the race. It always adds a bit more excitement when it's a safety car, though. But nevertheless, it was an incredibly important weekend for Norris, one that he needed to beat Verstappen at, and something he needs to do in the rest of the races now if he wants to be crowned champion at the end of the season. Personally, I think it's a bit too big of a mountain to climb. I think it's too little too late. It'll be very hard pressed to win the championship from here on, because Max did what he needed to after getting those penalties. He came back up into point scoring position and limited the points gap that Norris could earn to increase the gap between him and Verstappen in the championship. So say what you want about Max, but he managed to do what he needed to. And unfortunately, because I'm not a Max fan, that's what champions do. So he's going to be very hard pressed, Norris is, to actually win the championship this year. But it was important mentally for him. It would have been very demoralising if he finished behind Max, or if Max didn't get penalised for any of the antics that happened. So mentally, Norris is going to be feeling a lot better after this weekend. And that is incredibly important to carry through to the finishing part of the season, because if you're demoralised in these next few races, they're going to turn out rubbish for you. Let's hope he can take something from this weekend into Brazil next weekend, which is a sprint weekend where more points are up for grabs. So it was also an incredibly important weekend for Ferrari, speaking of points. The 1 and 3 finish for them meant that they stepped closer to sealing the Constructors' title, which this really has been a season that's been turned upside down for Red Bull. I did not see Ferrari coming back to ultimately nearly sealing the Constructors' title for them. And, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Charles Leclerc who is also in the championship running. I mean, something's going to have to go wrong for Charles Leclerc to win it, but anything could happen. We've seen crazier endings before. So, yeah. I don't think he's going to win the championship, Charles Leclerc. It is between Max and Lando, but I think the Constructors' title is definitely Ferrari's. They are finishing with a much stronger car this year. I don't know what it is, because McLaren at one point were the strongest. I don't know whether they've just researched the right things and it's working incredibly well for their car, but I know one thing's for sure, Lewis is smiling in his helmet. He knows he's made the right choice next year, and yet again, when it was announced at the beginning of the season, everyone was questioning, just like his move from McLaren to Mercedes, if it's the right thing. It still could be the wrong thing. It's not 2025 yet. We could get to next season and Ferrari have a terrible car. That is something we'll only find out next year. But for now, it looks like he's played a blinder and he's moving to a strong team. Which, as it stands at the moment, Mercedes coming in at 5th best car at some races, he's going to be very happy at what he sees. Speaking of the future as well, I talked about it a little bit, Brazil coming next, which is a sprint weekend, which is also one of Lewis's favourite tracks. He calls it a second home. And they treat him like he lives there too. They treat him like he is Brazilian. The reception he gets at that track is amazing. He has a mural there as well, which is quite impressive. Speaking race-wise though, I have no idea what we're going to see. I know one thing's for sure, qualifying here is very surprising and it could be turned on its head completely. This is where K-Mag qualified pole in the Haas, and it's due to rain all weekend, so we could see something crazy like that again. It's supposed to rain through Saturday and Sunday, so sprint qualifying on Friday might be dry, but the actual race qualifying, that should be wet, and we could be looking at a wet race. I think it's been a while since I've seen a wet race in Brazil. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think, I could be very wrong here, but I think the last wet race I remember is when Lewis won his first title, breaking all those Ferrari hearts. It's a bit of a sore subject, but yeah. I know one thing's for sure, Max-wise, we could see what we normally see after a very eventful weekend for Max. So what usually happens after a weekend like this, where Max has been a bit crazy and had a bit of an eventful time, is we see a very reserved Max now. So on the radio, where something doesn't happen, we could see a very calm Max, a very, almost like he's been told off by his dad and he's saying, you better calm down and watch yourself. And we could see a very reserved Max Verstappen, and next time someone tries to overtake him, he just leaves the door open and lets them through. Or we could see a Max Verstappen who is on the edge and feeling the pressure of trying to retain a world championship title, trying to retain that number one on his car. We could see him just as angry as ever and fighting just as hard as ever and swearing down the team radio just as hard as ever. Qualifying, it's between McLaren and Ferrari. With it being another high altitude circuit, but a bit more of a free flowing one, with medium speed being more important here, I think McLaren are going to have a stronger qualifying than Ferrari, but it's definitely between Ferrari and McLaren. If Lando can get pole position, it's going to help him at the race start, but he definitely needs to nail his race start. This track, you cannot be caught lacking or caught slacking, either one. But it would be nice if Lewis Hamilton could grace us with a podium win, but I don't see that happening personally. I am excited for it though. So until next week, take care, guys.